Investment banking interviews are one of the hardest interviews you can prepare for. In fact, only 2% of applicants actually make it through to the end. So if you're looking to apply for an analyst role, an associate role, or even an internship role in investment banking, in this video we're going to go over the kind of questions and answers you need to have in order to ace your interviews. Hi, I'm Nasir. I started investment banking in central London in 2013, where I've interviewed and hired over a dozen candidates. So in this video, we're not going to be going over the actual interview process. I'll save that for another video. Here we're going to go over the actual questions and answers you need to have in order to ace your interviews. Typically speaking, there are two categories of questions that you're going to get asked in your investment banking interviews. Category number one are technical questions. This is where the interviewer is going to test your basic accounting skills, your finance knowledge, your financial valuation skills, and your knowledge on mergers and acquisitions and LBOs. The next category of questions are behavioural type questions. And this is to test your motivation for investment banking, your fit for investment banking, and to see if you're aware of the investment banking lifestyle. A lot of people want to be investment bankers, but they have no idea about what it takes to be an investment banker from a day-to-day perspective. So let's get started with behavioural questions. And you are guaranteed to get one question in any interview you go for investment banking. And that's going to be the first question. And it will usually go something like, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your resume, or tell me why are you here today. Essentially, they're all asking for the exact same thing, which is to give context behind your resume. And this is very important because this is going to be the first impression the interviewer is going to get of you. So for this question, you pretty much have 2 minutes to summarize your background, to explain why you did some of the stuff that you've done on your resume, and to explain your motive for investment banking. Now, what most people do wrong is they just regurgitate whatever is on their resume. So they will just say they went to this college, this university, they studied X, Y, Z. That is not what the investment banker is looking for. What we're looking for are the reasons why you attended this college, this university. Why did you study X, Y, Z? Not what you studied, but why did you study it? Here you can also explain any gaps on your resume as well as highlight any achievements which are relevant to investment banking. And if you answer this question well enough, you pretty much have combined why are you interested in investment banking and tell me about yourself in one question. So it's really important that you nail this question down. Another type of behavioral question are personal and fit style questions. And this is to test your weaknesses, your strengths, your motives for investment banking. Usually the type of questions you can expect here are tell me about your greatest strengths, tell me about your weaknesses. Why are you interested in investment banking? Why don't you have enough work experience in investment banking? Why are your grades so low? So you need to prepare stories and answers for those type of questions. So effectively, you need to have 3 stories at a minimum. One story on a time when you led a team successfully, a time when you failed at a project and what did you learn from it, and a time when you succeeded at a project and what was it and what did you learn from it. Then you need to prepare 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses which are relevant to investment banking. Now, you have to pay attention to the role which you're applying for. If you're applying for an analyst or an internship, then one of your weaknesses can be the fact that you're not good at delegating or you're not good at public speaking. Because your job requirement as an analyst or an intern doesn't require you to do much public speaking, doesn't require you to do much delegation. However, if you're applying for an associate role, then your role does require you to delegate tasks to your analyst and your intern. So a weakness of not being able to delegate as an associate is not good. It's fine at an analyst, at an intern level, but at an associate level, you have to be able to delegate and you have to give examples of time when you have delegated. So your weaknesses, your strengths, and your answers have to be dependent on the role which you're applying for. Because the roles are different, so therefore the skills required to do those roles are also going to be different. And finally, you need to prepare answers to red flags. So for example, if you are not from a finance background, then be prepared to justify why the switch to investment banking if you haven't studied finance before. Or if you don't have any investment banking or finance work experience, then you have to explain why you weren't able to get an investment banking internship. Or if your grades are low, or if you didn't attend an elite school, you need to prepare answers for that. And again, all the questions, you can find it all on the investment banking interview guide. The link is in the description below, as well as the ideal answers for all of these questions. And you can also check out our other videos on how to answer some of these specific questions. Now let's move on to the second category of questions, which are technical questions. And this is where the vast majority of candidates struggle. Now, technical questions are pretty much broken into 6 different areas. You have accounting questions, finance questions, valuation questions, mergers and acquisitions, LBO, and brain teasers or tricky questions. So let's start with accounting questions. Now, you don't need to be an accountant to work in investment banking, but as a junior investment banker, whether an intern, an analyst, or an associate, you are going to be dealing with financial documents and financial numbers on a day-to-day basis. So you need to be able to understand it and know how to extrapolate these numbers and how to interpret these numbers. You can only do that by knowing basic accounting. So for your interview, you are going to be tested on basic accounting. A common question here is, walk me through the 3 financial statements. You can simply start by saying the income statement shows you the company's revenue, all of its expenses, and at the end it shows you its net income. Second, you have the balance sheet, which shows you the economic resources available to a company at a snapshot in time, as well as following a simple formula of assets equal liability plus shareholder equity. Finally, you have the cash flow statement, which starts with the net income, and then it adjusts for all the non-cash expenses and adjustments. And finally, it shows you the actual cash position you have in the bank. Then, another common question is to actually explain and go through specific line items which you can find on each of these financial statements. Other common questions is to walk through an adjustment on the 3 financial statements. So what would happen if inventory went up? Or what would happen if depreciation or accounts payable went up or down by $100? Walk me through the adjustments on each of the financial statements. So if depreciation went up by $10, that's pre-tax. So you have to tax adjust it. That will then hit the net income. Then that will lead into the cash flow statement. Since it's depreciation, it has to be adjusted again. Then at the end, it's going to inflate the cash position, which is then going to be linked into the balance sheet of the asset section. And then to balance the balance sheet, we then need to adjust the shareholder equity. Now that's an oversimplified version of that answer. For a more detailed answer on this question, have a look at our video on the 10 essential technical question and answer. Now these questions are going to be dependent on your experience and your background. So if you are from a finance background, then expect really difficult questions. But if you're not from a finance background, then you can pretty much expect just basic questions on explaining specific line items and walking through the 3 financial statements. Another category of technical questions are finance related questions. And at a minimum, you have to know some of the core financial concepts of the capital asset pricing model, the weighted average cost of capital, internal rate of return. You have to know these concepts and as well as metrics. In investment banking, we use a lot of metrics to explain the specific situation of one company against a group of other companies or against a specific company. And we benchmark them, we measure them by using metrics. EV over EBITDA, EBIT, PE multiples. So you have to know some of the common multiples that we use. So common questions here are going to be, what is CAPM? What is beta? What is operating leverage? Why would 2 companies with identical earnings in the exact same industry but yet have 2 different PE multiples? Why might a company be trading at a lower EV to EBITDA multiple than its competitor in the exact same industry? In a world without taxes, if a company issues $1,000 worth of debt and pays it out as a dividend, how would that impact the balance sheet? So those are the kind of finance questions you should prepare for. So now let's move on to valuation questions. So as a minimum here, you have to know how to value companies using the 3 standard valuation methodologies: DCF, comparables, and precedent transactions. And ideally, you should learn 2 more valuation methodologies. So it could be sum of the part valuation, or any other type of valuation which you can find. You should also know about capital structure, how to get from enterprise value to equity value and vice versa, the changes, the adjustments, what do they mean for the company. So a common question here is, walk me through a DCF. How would you value a company? Name me 5 ways you can value a company. What percentage of the DCF is normally attributable to the terminal value, and why? Would you use levered free cash flow or unlevered free cash flow in a DCF model? How do you treat deferred taxes in a DCF? What do equity value and enterprise value mean? What are the advantages and disadvantages of using EV over EBITDA, EV over EBIT, or PE as a multiple? And again, there are hundreds of questions on this specific topic. Have a look at the interview guide for all the questions and the answers. So those are just the kind of questions you should prepare for as an analyst, an associate, and an intern going into investment banking. So now let's move on to mergers and acquisition questions. So at a minimum, you should be able to walk your interviewer through an M&A model and talk about the accretive and dilutive effect of specific mergers and acquisition targets. And talk about the effects of synergy. How do you get synergy? What is synergy? For those of you that are new to investment banking, synergy is effectively when you combine 2 companies and you can consolidate some of the cost structures. So you can reduce the cost of 2 companies when they combine. And that's cost synergy. There are revenue synergy and cost synergy. So you have to know the difference, which one is more accurate to predict and which one is not. Now for internship level interviews, this one's pretty simple. We're not going to go for a lot of the technical questions which we would normally ask analysts and associates. If you're applying for an internship, then expect basic questions on just an M&A model and the concept of synergy, defense tactics, and what are some of the recent M&A deals you've heard of, and what are some of the motives behind M&As. Now, if you are applying for an analyst and associate role, then you can expect to get a lot more technical questions on M&As. So for example, what are the pros and cons of an all-cash versus all-share deal? Who would pay more to acquire a company, a strategic buyer or a financial buyer, and why? Why do accretive mergers still see the acquiring company's share price fall? If a company with a PE multiple of 30 were to acquire a company with a PE multiple of 15, would that deal be accretive or dilutive? And some interviewers will even ask about some of the recent M&As which have been announced, either by the specific bank which you're interviewing at or in general. So make sure you read up on the bank's M&A history, especially deals which have been closed in the last 6 months, and about major deals which have been announced. You can easily find this on the Wall Street Journal, on Bloomberg, and on Reuters. So that's pretty much it for M&A type questions. And now let's move on to LBO questions. A lot of investment banking clients are a private equity firm who uses leverage buyout as a way to buy out companies and generate a high return. So it's important as an investment banker to know exactly how private equity firms are valuing companies and what they are seeing. So at a minimum, you have to be able to walk your interviewer through an LBO model confidently and know what the internal rate of return is going to be of specific deals. So a common question which you're pretty much guaranteed to get if you're an analyst or an associate is, walk me through an LBO model. What would make an ideal LBO candidate? Talk to me about some of the major LBO deals which has been announced. You can expect a lot of questions on the type of debt structures which private equity firms use to actually buy a company. So whether it's going to be mezzanine debt, long-term debt, whatever type of debt it may be, you have to know the pros and cons of a lot of these debt structures. A lot of LBO deals are going to be judged on its internal rate of return, IRR. So you can expect questions like, with an equity investment of 100 million and an exit equity value of 300 million, after 3 years, what will be the IRR? Give me the formula. And that's pretty much it for LBO questions. So now let's move on to brain teasers. And I know a lot of candidates hate brain teasers. And the good thing is, investment bankers, we typically use a list of 20 to 25 brain teasers that we like to ask over and over again. So in the interview guide, for those of you who have it, just go to the last chapter and you can pretty much see all of the answers there. Towards the end of the interview, the interviewer would likely ask the candidate if they have any questions for them. Do not waste this opportunity. You can pretty much ask anything that you want. So how did they get started in investment banking? What team do they work for? How is the work-life balance? How is the culture at the firm? And you can pretty much use some of their response in the next round of interviews. So during the next round of interviews, if someone asks you, why this bank, why this firm, you can pretty much cite the culture which you got from the first interviewer. So don't waste this opportunity to actually find out more about the bank and to actually build a personal relationship with the interviewer. And that's going to separate you from pretty much everyone else. Okay, so now let's just look at the interview overall. For those of you that understand these questions and for those of you that cannot answer these questions, then congratulations. You're going to find the investment banking interviews pretty easy. Whether you're going to go into mergers and acquisitions or capital markets, it's going to be pretty easy. But for those of you that are struggling, then you can pretty much understand why only 2% of applicants actually make it through to the final stages and actually getting the role. So don't feel bad if you can't answer these questions. And the reality is the vast majority of candidates can't. And the reason for that is most finance candidates, they assume that because they learned finance in class, in school, at university or college, that they're going to be able to easily ace this interview because they're only going to get asked stuff that they've learned in class, which is completely false. And that's an assumption that we see every single year. Every single year, a lot of finance candidates come in, whether it's Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and they just assume that they're going to be able to pass their interview by simply regurgitating what they've learned in class. And it's a rude wake-up call once they realize that the questions that we ask them is concerned about real-world finance and not classroom finance. So it's important for you to prepare for your interviews. And a lot of candidates who are not from a finance background, whether they're from engineering, law, economics, architecture, geography, the reason why you find a lot of non-finance candidates in investment banking is because they actually take the time to prepare for their interviews. They take the time to actually learn about the question that's going to come up and the answers that is required to ace their interviews. And this is why you see so many non-finance candidates in investment banking. At the end of the day, as interviewers, we have to be fair to both finance and non-finance candidates. We can't just make it easier for non-finance candidates. We're still going to ask them pretty much the exact same question. And depending on who gives us the right answer, we'll progress onto the next round of interviews. And the vast majority of the time is candidates who've prepared for these interviews that will give the right answers. So make sure you prepare for your interviews by learning technicals, basic accounting, finance, valuation, M&A, LBO, and be prepared for behavioural questions. And pretty much like anything else, if you're just starting out in your investment banking recruitment, then this is going to be pretty daunting for you because there's a lot to learn, a lot to consume. But just focus on the fundamentals and you will slowly find that it's getting easier and easier. Now, ideally, you should prepare for your interviews at least 3 to 4 months in advance. Now, for those of you that don't have the time, then just focus on technicals. Now let's take a look at some of the common questions that I normally get concerning investment banking interviews. And the number one question that I normally get is, what if I don't know the answers during the interviews? Should I ask for the right answer? And I would say not necessarily. I would only ask for the right answer if you know half of the answer. So if I were to ask you for a technical question and you only know half of the answer, then consider asking for the full answer. And the reason is there's no point getting this wrong because you're more likely going to get asked the exact same question in another round of interviews. So there's no point getting the exact same question wrong twice in a row. So ask for the right answer here so you can actually give it in the next interview. Another question that I get asked is, should I bring a pen and paper to the interview? And I would just say, no, don't. Because if you're going to bring a pen and paper, some do, an extreme minority do. They tend to get asked some of the more difficult questions, the multi-scenario questions that will require a pen and paper. And it's just strange, you're going to stand out because the vast majority of candidates are not going to be bringing a pen and paper into their interviews. Another important question that I get asked is, are the questions the same for interns and analysts, the roles? And the reality is, 20 years ago, they might have been very different, but now they're pretty much similar. Because as investment banks, we tend to look for analysts in the current internship cohort. So if you're applying for an internship, then there is a strong probability that you're going to get asked to be an analyst. And similar to me, when I started out as an intern, I was promoted to becoming an analyst. So whenever we hire interns, we are indirectly looking for the future analyst at the firm. So some of the questions that you are going to get asked will be analyst level questions. So you have to prepare for them, even though you're applying for an internship. But nonetheless, if you're applying for a straight up analyst role, then the questions are going to be a lot more difficult, especially on the technical side. If you're applying for an internship, then you expect to get half of your questions technicals and the other half behavioural. If you're applying for an analyst role, then expect to get asked 70% technical questions, 30% behavioural questions. And similar for associate roles, 70 to 80 technical questions and 20 to 30 behavioural questions. But there's a stronger emphasis on behavioural questions for associates, because associates will likely progress to be vice presidents and eventually managing directors. So we're looking for a more permanent hire in associates. For analysts, it's more of a training contract. So whether they stay on or not, that's always an option. But it's quite different. If you want to know more about this, then take a look at the investment banking structure videos that I've made and the difference between investment banks and investment banking video. And I would actually recommend you to watch that video, because there's a lot of people out there who don't understand the difference between investment banking and investment banks. And that confusion causes a lot of problems for candidates. Another question that I get asked is, do I need to learn financial modeling for investment banking? And the reality is, no, you don't need to learn financial modeling. And it actually depends. If you're going to be applying for a bulge bracket bank, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, the likes, you don't need to learn financial modeling, because once you start, you're going to go on a training program that's going to teach you this. However, a lot of candidates learn financial modeling so that they can actually have an edge over other candidates. Now, do you need to do that? No. What you do need to do is prepare for your interviews and to actually learn about the questions which you're going to get asked and how to answer them correctly. That's going to determine whether or not you get in to investment banking or not. Whether or not you know financial modeling is just a bonus, it's just a feature. What you do need to know is how to answer interview questions. And learning financial modeling is just to help you answer interview questions, specifically the technical side. But if you can learn about the investment banking interviews via an interview guide, then that will be my first step, especially if you don't have enough time. If you have more than 2 months, 3 months, then by all means try and go for a financial modeling course. If you have less than 2 months, I would just suggest to learn the questions. If you have any other questions, put them in the comment section below and I'll try to answer them in the comment section below or in the next video. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope this has shed light on what you should be expecting in your investment banking interviews. Again, whether you're going to be applying at Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, boutique banks, middle market banks, if you're applying for investment banking roles, mergers and acquisitions and capital markets, so ECM, DCM, the IPO roles and raising capital via debt market, then these are the kind of questions which you're going to get. And especially if you're going to be applying for more capital market roles, expect more finance and market related questions. If this video has helped you, then please share it and like it, and drop me a comment and tell me what would you like me to cover in our next video and what you found helpful in this video as well, so I know what to elaborate more on.